Before we begin, take a moment to support the channel. If you enjoy real-life inspired stories about relationships, difficult choices, and the quiet moments that shape who we become, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. At 43, I believed my life had finally reached that calm stage people talk about but rarely recognize while it's happening. My name is Laura, and for 16 years my husband Greg and I had built a marriage that felt steady and dependable. It wasn't dramatic or unpredictable. It didn't swing wildly between highs and lows. Instead, it rested in that quiet middle ground where trust replaces excitement, and routine becomes its own form of comfort. We had built our lives piece by piece over time. A home that felt familiar in every corner. Careers that paid the bills and gave us purpose. Evenings, we filled it with other things. Friendships. Travel when we could afford it. Family gatherings during holidays and birthdays. The small traditions that slowly form when two people share a life long enough. And then there was Ethan. Ethan was my sister-in-law's son. I had known him since he was a little boy with curious eyes and endless questions about everything around him. Over the years, I watched him grow from that energetic child into someone thoughtful, intelligent, and surprisingly mature for his age. He had a way of listening that most young people didn't. When someone spoke, Ethan paid attention. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush to give his opinion. He simply absorbed what was being said, as if every conversation was something worth learning from. I admired that about him, maybe more than I realized at the time. Without ever meaning to, I had slowly become someone he trusted. Sometimes he would ask for advice about school. Other times it was about friends, relationships, or decisions about the future. I never tried to play the role of a second mother. I simply listened and offered my perspective when he asked for it. And over the years, something quietly formed between us. A bond built on trust, respect, and understanding. In many ways, he filled a space in my life I hadn't fully acknowledged before. Not as a replacement for a child, but as someone whose growth I felt invested in. Watching him succeed brought me a kind of quiet pride that surprised me. Which is why, when my sister-in-law invited us to Ethan's 23rd birthday dinner, I was genuinely excited. Family gatherings had always been something I enjoyed. There was something comforting about being surrounded by people who shared your history. People who remembered the same stories, the same holidays, the same old jokes repeated every year. That Saturday evening felt no different. The house was warm with conversation and laughter the moment we arrived. Music played softly in the background while relatives moved between the kitchen and living room carrying dishes, glasses, and plates of food. Ethan greeted us at the door with a bright smile. "Laura. Greg. You made it." He pulled us both into a quick hug before leading us inside. There was an energy around him that night, part excitement, part nervousness. Turning 23 felt significant to him, though I couldn't quite say why. Maybe it was the age itself. Or maybe it was the realization that adulthood was no longer something approaching in the distance. It had already arrived. Dinner stretched longer than anyone expected. Stories were shared. Glasses were raised in celebration. Someone began reminiscing about Ethan as a child, which naturally led to several embarrassing childhood memories that had everyone laughing. Even Ethan couldn't help laughing at himself. Greg, meanwhile, seemed unusually relaxed. He wasn't someone who drank often, but that evening he allowed himself a few extra glasses of wine. By the time dessert arrived, his cheeks were flushed and his voice carried the unmistakable warmth of someone enjoying the moment a little too freely. I didn't mind. In fact, I found it amusing. Greg was normally the responsible one in social situations. Seeing him loosen up felt refreshing. But by the time the evening began winding down, it was clear he had enjoyed himself a bit more than usual. When we stood up to leave, he placed a hand on the table for balance. "I think," he said with a slow smile, "I may have slightly underestimated that last glass of wine." Everyone laughed, including him. But Ethan noticed immediately that Greg wasn't entirely steady. "Let me help you," he said, stepping forward. Together, we guided Greg outside toward the car. The cool night air helped a little, but he still leaned slightly against the door as I opened it. "I've fine," Greg insisted. "I know you are," I replied gently. "But you're also sitting in the passenger seat tonight." Ethan chuckled as he helped settle Greg into the car. Good call. Greg closed his eyes the moment the door shut, already drifting into the comfortable haze of someone ready for sleep. Ethan hesitated beside the car for a moment. Do you want me to follow you guys home? Just to make sure everything's okay. His concern was genuine. I considered it briefly, then nodded. That might actually be helpful. The drive home was quiet. Greg slept most of the way, his head resting against the window. I kept my focus on the road while Ethan followed behind us in his car. When we finally pulled into our driveway, the house felt unusually still. Together, Ethan and I helped Greg inside. He barely stirred as we guided him down the hallway and onto the bed. Within minutes he was asleep, breathing slowly and peacefully. I pulled the blanket over him and turned off the light. When I returned to the kitchen, Ethan was standing near the counter looking thoughtful. Water, he asked. Yes, please. He filled a glass and handed it to me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Something about his posture told me there was something on his mind. Not casual conversation. Something heavier. Finally, he exhaled slowly. Laura, can I ask you something? His tone had shifted completely. I leaned slightly against the counter. Of course. He looked down at the floor, gathering his thoughts. I don't really know who else to talk to about this. There was hesitation in his voice. Not fear exactly, but uncertainty. I've been thinking a lot about my life lately, he continued. About what I'm supposed to do. Who I'm supposed to become. I listened quietly. For years it felt simple. Go to school. Work hard. Make everyone proud. He gave a small, uncertain smile. But now that I'm actually here, it doesn't feel simple anymore. He began pacing slowly across the kitchen. I keep wondering if I'm making the right choices. If the path I'm on is actually mine, or just the one everyone expects me to follow. There was vulnerability in his words, a kind of honesty people rarely express unless they trust the person listening. I feel like I'm supposed to have everything figured out, he said. But the truth is, I don't. I understood that feeling more than he probably realized. Because adulthood rarely arrives with clarity. Most people simply learn to hide their uncertainty better. Ethan, I said gently. Feeling unsure doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're paying attention. He looked up at me. You really think so? Ido. He leaned against the counter, arms folded. Sometimes I feel like everyone sees me as this confident, capable person. Like I'm supposed to be strong all the time. His voice lowered. But I'm not always strong. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I think, I said carefully, that most people feel exactly the way you do at some point. He seemed relieved just hearing that. I guess I just needed someone to say it. He paused before continuing. There's something else too. I waited. It's hard to explain, he admitted. Sometimes when you admire someone, when you respect them, it can get confusing. I understood what he meant before he finished the sentence. Not because he said it directly, but because of the way he looked at me. There was admiration there, but also something more complicated. Something he was still trying to understand. And in that moment, I realized this conversation was far more important than it first appeared. Not because of what he felt, but because of what guidance he needed. I spoke gently, choosing my words carefully. Ethan, admiration can sometimes feel stronger than it really is, especially when you're still figuring out who you are. He listened closely. When someone offers support or understanding during confusing times, it's natural to feel drawn toward them. He nodded slowly. But those feelings don't always mean what they seem to mean. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. Sometimes, I continued, they simply mean you found someone you trust. He thought about that for a moment. So you're saying it's normal? It's human. I smiled softly. But it's also important to understand the difference between emotional closeness and something deeper. He absorbed that quietly. And boundaries exist for a reason, I added. To protect relationships that already matter. The words settled in the room between us. He looked thoughtful, not embarrassed or ashamed. Just reflective. I think I understand, he said eventually. There was relief in his voice. Not disappointment. clarity. After a few more minutes of conversation, he stood up and grabbed his jacket. "Thank you," he said sincerely, "for listening. For trusting me enough to talk." He smiled before heading toward the door. "Good night, Laura." "Good night, Ethan." When the door closed behind him, the house returned to silence. I remained in the kitchen for a long time afterward. Not because I felt uneasy, but because moments like that have a way of making you reflect on the fragile balance of relationships. The choices we make in quiet conversations can shape the direction of someone's life more than we realize. Over the following weeks, Ethan focused more deeply on his studies and future plans. Our conversations remained warm but respectful. The bond between us didn't disappear. It simply found its proper place. Greg, meanwhile, continued to be the steady partner he had always been. Our life returned to its familiar rhythm. Yet that night stayed with me, not as something uncomfortable, but as a reminder. Life doesn't always test us through dramatic events or obvious temptations. Sometimes it tests us through small moments of vulnerability, moments when someone is searching for guidance, moments when the right words can protect what truly matters. Because in the end, the strength of our character is rarely defined by what we feel. It is defined by the choices we make when those feelings appear. If this story made you reflect on the choices that shape our lives, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.